Alright guys, BLM here back with a new video, and in this video we're back with another of a yearly tradition, a video that I've been doing for 6 years now, that being my year in gaming video. This time for the year of 2024, which is very late. I try to release these videos in the first half of the following year, and technically I'm recording this in the first half of the following year, but obviously again, this is coming out pretty late, but that's just the way it ended up being in a spot that's kind of weird. That's the case because I actually started playing games from the year 2024 earlier than I did in any of the previous years, doing so pretty much immediately after I finished the last year in gaming video. So the fact that I actually ended up finishing less games this year than last year is kind of saying that a lot of that's just due to obviously games getting longer, me playing a lot of really long games, which again we'll get into. But again, if you don't know what this video is, this is a video I do every year, again talking about all the games I played that were released in the previous year, running through all the games that I did not get around to playing, then talking about all the games that I played but then not finished, and then finally ending the video with me ranking every game that I finished from the year, ultimately naming my game of the year for the year of 2024. Now, I do want to start off the video by talking just generally about the year 2024, which was kind of just a fine year for gaming. I mean, I think it's a spot where I remember coming out of 2023, looking at 2024 as a year lined up to be a pretty weak year, and ultimately I do think it is a year that doesn't have many like heavy hitters in it. Though I think it's a year that was really dominated by Japan, where I think so many of my top games from the year end up being from Japanese companies, and I think that really ended up salvaging the year in a spot where 2024 from a more Western perspective ended up being a rather weak year. Though to be fair, I didn't get around to playing everything. Though even then, a lot of the games I missed out on were Japanese games anyway. But either way, ultimately ends up being a pretty strong year, with the games at the very top of the list here have really become some of my favorite games of all time, not just of the year itself. But either way, now let's talk about the games that I did not get around to playing. Now, like previous years, I will say this again, I still do not have a Nintendo Switch, and through that again, did not play a lot of the Switch exclusives that came out for the year. Games like Mario and Luigi Brothership, Princess Peach Showtime, Super Mario Party Jamboree, all games that, again, I would have been interested in, yet again, just did not play them because, again, I still have a Switch and probably never will at this rate. For the rest of the games that I didn't get around playing, I'll talk about them in chronological order, starting off with Animal Well, which I hear is a very good game. Again, Metroidvania, they hear very good things about. Would have ideally liked to play it, did not get around to it. A Game of the Year nominee that I did not get around to playing was Black Myth Wukong, which, I'll be honest, I really don't have much interest in it. Like, obviously, again, there was a lot of hype around this game, it being, again, a Chinese, like, Souls-like. Yet, to me, it just never interested me. Again, I'm not a big Souls person to begin with. So, ultimately, again, I would have at least tried it out had it, again, dropped in price to a significant degree, but I still have not seen it below $50. And again, I feel like that's too high of a price for me to go out and try it when I know personally that I would probably not like it. Also, did not get around to playing Call of Duty Black Ops 6, starting off, again, a decent amount of games that I actually did have access to, and I just didn't have the time to play it. And again, I hear good things. It was on Game Pass, so I had access to it, but again, did not get around to it. Also, did not play Dragon Age The Veilguard, which I do own. I literally bought it. But to be fair, again, I knew I was not going to have the time to play it, and I still haven't played the older Dragon Age games. I've played Inquisition, I thought it was just okay, to where, again, ideally I would have played the Veilguard, even though I hear very mixed things about it, but again, did not get around to it. Same thing with Dragon's Dogma 2, which I would have loved to play. I bought this with the full intention of playing it. Yeah, again, it's still a spot where I have not played Dragon's Dogma 1. I would like to play that ideally before 2, and even then, again, 2 itself is a pretty bulky game, to where, again, did not have the time to play it. Also, Eulden Chronicles 100 Heroes is a game that was on Game Pass. I had access to. I wanted to play it. Heard pretty good things, just again, did not find a time to do so. Same thing with Fantasian Neo Dimension, a game that is from the original creator of Final Fantasy, and I hear mostly good things about it. I know it is a fairly difficult game, and beyond that also, technically this was a game released originally on mobile, and this is a re-release on console. Yeah, again, I would have included it as part of this list, and again, I literally bought it at launch, more so under the worry that it wouldn't be readily available physically after that, which again turned out it was, but either way, again, I bought it. I wanted to play it. Did not get around to it. Another game on Game Pass I wanted to play was Harold Halibut, like some sort of adventure game that has this like really interesting visual style of, again, being like claymation, to where, again, seemed like an interesting game. I hear good things about it. Just did not find time to play it before it left Game Pass. Next up, the only multiplayer game on this list, we got Helldivers 2, a game that, again, I would have ideally liked to try out. Again, if it was something that was like available on Game Pass, I probably would have, though obviously against PlayStation, and again, they obviously charge money for it, so again, I'm not going to spend money for Helldivers 2, but I did ideally want to play it. Another game that I hear a lot of good things about that I wanted to play was Lorelei and the Laser Eyes. I hear a very good like indie puzzle game, where, again, I know this is like talked about as one of the best indie games of the year, to where, again, I would have liked to play it. Yeah, I did not get around to it. Nine Souls is a game that is on Game Pass. Again, another pretty well-renowned, I believe, a Metroidvania-style game. Yeah, did not get around to it. Pacific Drive's another game that I wanted to play. I literally bought it. I don't actually really know what the game actually is, but I hear pretty good things about it, but did not get around to it. Pal World is a game that, again, was on Game Pass that really I don't have much interest in the game itself yet. However, it's obviously a game that really caught fire for a short period of time, and I did think about jumping in and streaming it at a point. Yeah, I just never did. Rise of the Ronin is a game that I know is, again, a Sony published game. Got kind of mixed reviews in a game that I don't know is really for me, but I did buy it with the intention of playing it. Yeah, just again, never gave it a shot. Also, Skull and Bones came out in the year of 2024, where I literally bought a copy and thought about streaming it. Yeah, another one I did not get around to, even though I thought it would have been funny. Stalker 2, Heart of Chernobyl is a game that, again, I thought looked pretty good from the short bits of gameplay I saw of it before its release. And again, it was on Game Pass where I had access to it, though, again, I heard kind of mixed things about it after its release. And also, I saw it's a pretty lengthy game, so where, again, I did not get around to playing it. Now, probably the biggest missed opportunity on this list, in my opinion, a game that I really wanted to play and just did not have the time to do so, was Unicorn Overlord, a game that I hear very good things about. I mean, I haven't played every Vanillaware game, but every game I've played of theirs has been pretty good. And again, I love 13 Sentinels Aegis Rim in particular, to where I know Unicorn Overlord is obviously a very different game. Yeah, again, I did really want to play it. However, it's another one that, again, I did not ultimately have the time to do so. Where really ultimately this ended up being a choice by the end of a decision of playing this or Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth. And I thought, like, again, considering I played obviously all the other Like a Dragon games, I decided to go that route instead. Yeah, again, I would love to play Unicorn Overlord at some point in the future. Another game I would have liked to play that I thought would just, again, be funny because I hear very bad things about it is Unknown 9 Awakening, where, again, another game I literally bought a copy of and thought about streaming it. Yeah, no, I didn't find time to. And the final game that I did not get around to playing is a game that I did not buy, but again, I would have liked to play. I heard very good things about it, and that is Until Then, which I believe is, again, a visual novel style game that, and again, I've heard overwhelmingly positive things about it. Yeah, I ultimately, again, did not get around to playing it. But again, that is all the games I did not get around to playing. Now let's jump into the games that I did play but did not finish, which there are a decent amount of them. Games that I at least attempted to stream, to where this is a year that I fully went all in on trying to stream games from the previous year that I did not have like a vested interest in, where obviously for games that, again, I care about the narrative, I really want to soak it in personally. Like those games, again, I played on my own time. However, again, I stream twice a week anyway. So again, with, again, games that I had less personal connection to, especially games that, again, don't have narratives that I'm that invested in, I decided to try to stream those games. And some of them I finished, most of them I did not. And really almost every game that I did not finish ends up being a game I streamed. So, again, I guess we'll talk about them in order of when I played them. Starting it off with a game that I generally forgot I played, that being Silent Hill, The Short Message, a free DLC Silent Hill spinoff that was just fine from what I played. I played most of it. I actually almost finished it on stream. I did not end up finishing it, though again, I mean, it had a creepy vibe to it, but outside that, again, just kind of a fine free game that, for being free, wasn't the worst thing in the world. Next, I'm moving on to Kitsunagami, Path of the Goddess, which is a game, again, I streamed for a few hours. It was on Game Pass, and again, it was an interesting game, kind of like a real-time strategy game where you have to defend the goddess as enemies attack them. And again, I thought like a very interesting concept. Yeah, a game that, again, just did not hold my attention for beyond a couple hours. Also, Flintlock, Siege of Dawn is a game I literally just popped in for like 30 minutes or so. I did not give this game a genuine chance, as it didn't really capture my attention yet. It's at least a game I did attempt to play. Same thing with Dungeons of Hinterberg, which is, again, another one I played for a couple hours. Again, another game on Game Pass, a kind of dungeon crawler with a unique art style that, again, was fine for what it was, but just a game that I just did not feel invested in finishing. I believe the only game that I played off-stream that I did not end up finishing from the year is shockingly Stellar Blade, which is a game that I was very hyped for. It was actually one of my most anticipated games coming into the year. I felt like it was a game that, again, kind of had these like Nier vibes to it, and ultimately when playing it, I was a little underwhelmed in the fact that I felt like it was a lot more focused around like the hack and slash gameplay, and the narrative really didn't compel me. So I ultimately did end up dying a few times at a boss, and I just was not really feeling the investment to go on and finish the game, to where sadly I did drop it after a few hours in a spot where, again, I was very much expecting it to be one of my top games of the year. Yeah, again, another game that I just ended up dropping. But again, back to games I did stream. I did stream Tales of Gansera Zao. Now, I will say, again, did not give this game a genuine chance. I probably played it for like 30 minutes before getting wrapped up and talking about Survivor, to where ultimately, again, it's a game that I would like to go back to and give another genuine chance to. too, as I hear very good things. And again, I love Abubakar Salim, the director of this game, who again also voiced Bayek in Assassin's Creed Origins, and has been in like House of the Dragon, where again, I have a lot of respect for Abubakar Salim, where again, I would love to give this game another chance down the road, but ultimately, again, just kind of popped it in and didn't go back to it. Star Wars Outlaws is a game I did end up playing for a few hours. Again, obviously a Ubisoft Star Wars game, and through that, you could expect that's bad, and what a shocker that I thought was kind of bad. But again, I kind of played it as a joke, and I intended on finishing it. Yeah, again, I didn't even do that. I also attempted to play Grand Blue Fantasy Relink, another game that, again, I was kind of excited to play. Yeah, it's one that, again, I just kind of got too focused around talking about other things to really pay attention to it while streaming it, to where I did give it like 4 to 5 hours. But all of a sudden, I found the combat just kind of repetitive, and again, just kind of dropped it. Also, a game that I started playing on stream, played it for a decent bit, and ultimately dropped it with the intention of finishing it on my own, but didn't get around to it, was the Plucky Squire game that, again, wasn't the greatest game in the world, but had like a very interesting concept. Again, it transitioning between 2D and 3D, and it feeling like you ripping a character out of a storybook. And again, I thought it was a really interesting game. Realistically, even if I finished it probably would have just been kind of like middle of the list, but it's still a game that I thought definitely had some charm. Yeah, again, did not finish it. Also, a game I played that I just thought was kind of funny to play. I did play Suicide Squad, Kill the Justice League, and it's another game I just did not feel invested to finish it. Yeah, I didn't think it was as bad as I was expecting it to be. It just felt like a very mid game, where like, and the combat got kind of repetitive, and obviously like it was nowhere close being the level of that of the Arkham games. Yeah, a game that, again, just was not even that bad, just very unnotable. There definitely was a disappointment, considering obviously coming from Rocksteady. Next up, a game that I just also wanted to play, because again, there was a lot of outrage over how woke this game was, which actually made me want to play it even more, which is Dustboard, which again, a narrative focused game published by Quantic Dream, to where again, I was interested in it. Yeah, again, probably not the best to stream it in a spot where I'm barely paying attention to the story, so again, did not finish it. Also, I did attempt to play Sandland, which is a game that is based on a manga from Akira Toriyama, to where again, I was interested in this game. Overall, it came off very repetitive, and I kind of dropped after like 8 hours of playing it, to where I did play a decent chunk of it, but ultimately, again, did not finish it. Also, a game I literally played just because I thought it'd be funny was Infinity Nikki, where again, I streamed this kind of, to where genuinely, again, I was not paying attention at all when playing this. Again, this was in the midst of Survivor 50 rumors and the ending of 48, to where again, I was so much more preoccupied with talking about that stuff than actually paying attention to Infinity Nikki, where I think in the 5-hour stream that I did while playing this, I probably only played like legitimately like 30 minutes of the game itself, so again, did not get too much out of it. And the final game I played but did not finish was the masterpiece that is Squirrel with a Gun. And again, this is just obviously such a over-the-top, wacky game that, again, just played because it's funny. And it's not a particularly well-made game. Yeah, again, it's just a funny concept of, again, you literally playing as a squirrel with a gun. Or again, I did have a lot of fun just navigating through the open world, though I did get stuck at a tank boss battle that was just, again, so frustrating to play that ultimately made me drop the game. Yeah, again, still just a funny game that exists. It was just, again, a funny game to just stream for a bit. But with that, those are all the games I did not finish. Now let's get into games that I did finish are still not on the list, which are either DLCs or remasters. Now, where again, for just straight up remasters, I typically do not include them in the actual ranking by the end. If they are just a 1-for-1 recreation, again, remakes I do include on the list. And again, there are a few remakes on the actual ranking, but in terms of remasters, I ultimately do not put them. Especially of games I've played in the past, I feel like, again, it just feels unfair to be comparing those games. So again, remasters I played from this year. The first one here is actually the game that I actually put the most amount of time into the entire year. Mind you, not for the remaster itself, but what came with the remaster, and that is The Last of Us Part 2 Remastered. Where, I mean, the remaster itself was, again, just kind of fine. Obviously, just the game in 60 frames, other enhancements. Again, there were some technical issues, but for the most part, again, ran fine most of the time. And beyond that, again, you got, like, lost levels added there. You got interviews with developers, and there were some cool additions there, but really the main addition here that I put so much time into was the no return mode, the roguelike mode that was added to the game, and I just had so much fun playing no return. It really ended up making me have to actually master the game itself in a spot where I do think I took Last of Us Part 2 kind of for granted from a gameplay perspective in the past, and again, playing no return and again, climbing up in difficulty to the point where I was playing on grounded mode led to me actually eventually finishing the main game on grounded mode, to where, again, I had just so much fun actually just improving my skill level with Last of Us Part 2. And again, I was playing literally daily runs every single day. Again, ultimately, No Return is actually my most played game of the year. I put well over 100 hours into playing No Return across the year. That being said, eventually I did drop it. I dropped it after playing it for about 6 months or so. And obviously, ultimately, it just got a bit repetitive as they didn't really add new content for a while. Obviously, they did in the time since. Yeah, again, haven't really gone back to it. But again, I got what I wanted out of the game. I beat a specific score I wanted, to where ultimately, again, I had a lot of fun with No Return. Straight up, again, if No Return itself was on the list, it'd probably be one of the top games of the year for me. Probably not exactly my game of the year, as again, we'll get to it. But again, I could see it being number 3 or 4 or so. But ultimately, again, I just did not feel like it was appropriate to actually put it on the list. Considering it's essentially just a mode in the remaster here. But beyond that, again, also other remasters I played, I did play Lollipop Chainsaw Repop, a remaster of Lollipop Chainsaw, a game that I remember playing when I was younger, and I thought it was just kind of a fine game then, and it's kind of just a fine game now. Again, obviously just very over the top hack and slash game. Didn't really notice any significant improvements here on the remaster, to where ultimately, again, did not include it on the list. And also, I did play the Horizon Zero Dawn remaster, which I did not love, where, again, I think the issue with a lot of these remasters that I've really come to recognize over time is the fact that I do think a lot of them kind of strip the original game of their artistic integrity, where I think with a lot of games, especially made before the ability to make games like so photorealistic, a lot of them have a, again, intentional art style utilized to contrast that. And again, Horizon, like almost every other game, has a specific color scheme to really exude what the developers want you to feel in certain areas, and I feel like the remasters kind of strips the game of that. It kind of just goes for just photorealism, and it's about where, again, I think that's kind of lame. Now, obviously, the game looks better on a surface level, and I didn't run into any performance issues. It just felt like Horizon Zero Dawn again, but ultimately, again, I just felt like it was a remaster that really did not give me what I wanted by the end, but obviously, again, I could just go back to the original game. Now, I do want to jump into talking about the DLCs for games I played across the year, starting it off with the DLCs for Alan Wake 2, which was obviously my game of the year for 2023, where we do have Night Springs and the Lake House, which for me just were kind of fine by the end. I felt like Night Springs, obviously, just kind of an episodic one that had you playing as numerous characters in these shorter bits of gameplay. It really did not give me what I wanted. I really feel like it didn't do much for me by the end. Not really adding much to the grander narrative there. While the Lake House was, again, a bit better in that light, and again, definitely like catered a lot more to like the horror vibes. And again, does at least progress the narrative to some degree, obviously setting up Control 2. Yeah, ultimately, again, felt it was still kind of just fine by the end. But the other DLC I played is actually a DLC for a game that came out this year, which we might talk about on the list. That being the Persona 3 Reload DLC, episode I Guess The Answer, which again is kind of weird to have here, as again, it's technically kind of like a remake of a previous expansion, but still, as we'll talk about, I do love Persona 3. However, Persona 3 episode I Guess was just really annoying to play, very tedious, just kind of a grind sesh that was, again, just not fun. Now, I do get it within its narrative. I do think narratively this game at least does something interesting, but in terms of my actual enjoyment playing the DLC, again, it just wasn't fun to play. And again, that obviously is something that did lessen my opinion on it, with also not being a particularly needed epilogue to the main game, to where, again, I don't love the DLC by the end, but I do get its purpose. Either way, with that, now actually get to the games I played from the year, which again, I did finish 22 games this year. Now, in comparison to previous years, last year I finished 23, so it's technically one less than that. Yeah, I have technically finished more games than any other year beforehand, but also, again, I did start playing games earlier in the year, and also I did play a decent amount of games on stream as well. So again, I think you would have expected that I would have finished more games than this, but either way, again, gonna rank 22 games. So let's start off. At number 22, the worst game from the year of 2024 for me is a game that might be a shocker to most people. It's a game that is critically renowned, a game that was nominated for Game of the Year, a game that people seem to love, yet I fucking hate, and that is Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. And I generally just do not understand how people like this game. Where I feel like a lot of the reason why people just like this game is because they like Final Fantasy VII, they like the characters involved with it. Yeah, again, this game is just such slop. And again, I've done an entire spoiler review around this, and I've rewatched it somewhat recently. I feel like those opinions largely still stick, but it's a game that just feels so bloated. It feels like it's a game that has so much filler in it. It feels like a game that is essentially just a Ubisoft game with a Final Fantasy VII coding on top, and beyond that, it's just such a mess narratively. It feels like a game that just simply doesn't understand the original Final Fantasy VII, and to be fair, I was kind of content with that with the remake. However, that's because I thought with the remake they were going to tell a different story, until now I realize, oh, you're not telling a different story, you're just telling it in a different way that you think is better, but it's actually worse. To where I genuinely hate Rebirth. I think this is one of the worst games I've played in recent years. I do not understand how people love this game. I don't understand how people think this is a Game of the Year contender. I think this is a genuinely awful fucking game. And you think it might be a bit extreme to put this at the very bottom of the list, but I want to further emphasize just how much I do hate this game. So again, at the end of the day, I do have it here at number 22. Now number 21, moving on to a game that I thought would be at the bottom of the list after I played it, because I thought this was also a whole bunch of slop, despite being, again, a very high-profile game. And that game is Senua's Saga Hellblade 2. And again, I loved Hellblade 1. I thought it was a great game. It really tackled these interesting themes about depression, and I was very excited for Hellblade 2. Obviously, very hyped coming into it, considering all we saw from it before the game came out. And ultimately, again, it just feels like a mess. It just feels like a game that has no purpose to it. It feels like it's only a game that exists because Hellblade 1 was successful. It doesn't really feel like it has a message to it. It doesn't really feel like it has a particularly interesting narrative. And I feel like a lot of the game just came off so mundane. Obviously, so many moments where you're just walking forward with like nothing to do. And even when we get to the actual gameplay of it, I thought it was just less interesting than the original game. I just feel like, again, it just felt like a game that served no purpose. Or again, I'll still give a lot of credit to the performances in this game, particularly Senua's, where again, very well acted game. And again, I think visually this is a very impressive looking game. So again, I think it's very impressive from a technical perspective, but really from every other perspective, I just think it's a bit of a mess. So I think there's an argument it is worse than Rebirth, but again, I have more vitriol for Rebirth. So again, Hellblade 2's here at number 21. Now number 20, moving on to a game that, again, is just kind of okay. It's a narrative-focused game. A game I did not come in with high expectations of it, which probably leads to me leaving it a bit higher on those previous games. And that game is The Casting of Frank Stone, a game within the Dead by Daylight universe, which again, I've never played Dead by Daylight, but it's also a game developed by Supermassive Games, who created Until Dawn, the Dark Pictures games, which I've played all of those. So again, I felt like I had to play Casting of Frank Stone, and it was fine. I thought conceptually, I thought it was actually kind of interesting it following around this group that filmed a movie that later became haunted, and you like follow the game through the two separate timelines. And again, I thought a really interesting concept. Does it live up to it? Not really, but it's also not entirely bad either. I actually think it's probably amongst like the Dark Picture games, kind of like middle of the road for me, to where, again, I thought it was okay, but probably a game that won't stick to my mind for too much longer. But again, ultimately, again, just a very like kind of mid-narrative adventure game, but one that, again, doesn't really stand out in the grand scheme of things. So it's here number 20. Number 19. And that number 19 here, again, was one that I did debate here quite a bit, as this is another game that had a serious shot of being at the very bottom of the list. Yeah, again, I at least had fun with this game, even though it is bad. And that game is a Life is Strange Double Exposure. And obviously, again, I'm a massive Life is Strange fan. I was very excited to see the return of Max Caulfield, even though, again, I did worry about what exactly they're going to do with her. And I think I was right to be worried, because this game is really bad. And again, I've played it multiple times now. Literally streamed it just a few months ago, 100% of the game. And again, sorry, I just think this is a game that, again, is just such a mess narratively. Probably has one of the funniest endings to a game in recent years to me, where, again, I thought that was so ridiculous. And that just feels like a game that, again, probably shouldn't have existed. And I know a lot of people were like really upset at how they handled the ending of Life is Strange 1 in this, where, again, really at the end of the day, I think it's a game that really just probably should not have existed. I think we probably would have been better off, where really doesn't do anything to really innovate upon the original Life is Strange, and it just is another game that just feels like kind of a soulless product. Yeah, again, one that I at least had fun with, and I had fun making fun of. So again, in comparison to like Casting Frank Stone, I think it's a game that is at least going to stick with me a bit more, and I think in comparison to those bottom games, I don't have as much vitriol of this game. I just think it's funny. So again, I have it here number 19. Now, number 18, now we're kind of moving on into like the mid section of the list. Starting it off with a game, again, from a franchise that I do very much like, but just kind of a weird game to exist, and that is Lego Horizon Adventures, where I was, again, massive Horizon fan. However, Lego Horizon Adventures was just, again, just kind of okay. Again, I streamed it. It was an okay experience. Again, a competently made Lego game that obviously has these references to Horizon, but ultimately, again, didn't really do much in the grand scheme of things. I didn't really find much depth from the game itself, and obviously the story itself is just a retelling of the original, just with weird sequences within it, to where, again, not a game that really is going to last with me. And though, again, a major motivation behind me even bothering to play this was the fact that, again, it is part of the Horizon franchise. We're really outside that. I think this is probably a game that I probably wouldn't even bother to play, or even just dropped along the way. But ultimately, again, just a very competently made game that doesn't really do anything too special. So again, it's here at number 18. And with that, we're moving on to number 17 for a similar thing in a game that was in its years that I have a lot of nostalgia for. And again, I streamed this game, and ultimately, again, didn't really get too much out of it in the grand scheme of things. But that game is Dragon Ball Sparking Zero, where, again, as a kid, I loved Dragon Ball. I loved the Dragon Ball games. I bought the Budokai Tenkaichi games every year as they came out. And now we're at a point now where Sparking Zero is obviously the next in that series, and it's just kind of okay. Again, it just feels like a modern version of that, but doesn't really go beyond that. And I feel like, to me, again, I think those older Tenkaichi games are games that are going to just stick with me a lot more, particularly 2 and 3, to where ultimately, again, Sparking Zero here, again, just felt like a fine Dragon Ball experience, but one that did not connect with me me as much as the others. Now, yeah, I feel like this is the type of game that I probably would have been more into back in the day, or would be more into if I was actually into fighting games in the modern day. But again, at this point, I'm kind of disconnected from those sort of communities to where really this is a game that, again, I thought was a nice nostalgia trip, but didn't really provide me with too much more than that. But again, it's here at number 17. Number 16, the last game I actually played for this entire list. Another game that has a connection to a series that I do like, and that is Mighty Morphin Power Rangers Rita's Rewind, a beat 'em up made from the Power Rangers franchise. And again, it's just okay. Again, the story itself is a weird like retelling of MMPR up to Green with Evil, yet just adding in like the convoluted subplot of Robo Rita going back in time to connect it to Once and Always. And again, it's just kind of a weird narrative there, while the game itself, again, just a very basic beat 'em up, nothing of too much depth there. They did have like Megazord battles and stuff like that, which I hated. Again, the Dragon Zord battle in particular is one that really pissed me off, but really outside that, yeah, just kind of a okay beat 'em up, nothing too special here, but nothing really overtly negative about it either. Again, it's here 16. Or 15, moving to a more narrative based experience, but one that, again, just felt fine when I was playing it, but one that probably isn't going to stick with me too long, and that game is Open Roads, which is, again, a very short game. It was on Game Pass. However, I heard good things about it, and yeah, again, it's a fine narrative adventure game following a daughter-mother duo going on a journey to learn more about their heritage. Just kind of an okay, like, kind of walking sim by the end, where a lot of the gameplay revolves around you walking around these like smaller environments, interacting with things around you, learning more about the main characters' families through what you find, which ultimately, again, is just kind of fine. Now, again, this game does have some decent performances from Kara Russell and Caitlin Dever, who are some pretty decently big gets for the main characters here. Again, a touching enough story, but one that, again, just isn't really too expansive to the point where I think it'll stick with me as the years go by. Number 14, moving on to another game that, again, I streamed, I finished, and again, I played it entirely as a meme. Yeah, I actually kind of had fun playing it, and that game is Little Kitty Big City, a game that is literally you playing as a cat in this like big open world with the goal of getting back into their apartment building after falling off the balcony. And again, I thought this was a fun enough game. Again, a very basic game. It really is just a collectathon to increase the cat's stats enough that you can climb the building at the end. So I did end up really enjoying the progression system in this game. The fact that, again, it really feels like the entirety of the game is essentially you preparing for this big task that you could really take on at any point in the game. And I feel like while, again, pretty much everything you do to lead up to that is kind of monotonous, I do find the overall satisfaction you get when you complete that goal, though, again, to be something I do think this game handles pretty well. And again, I had fun playing it. I thought it was a fun stream game. I actually considered speedrunning at a point because I thought that'd be really funny, but ultimately, again, not a game of too much depth. But yeah, again, a game that I just had some fun with. But then moving on to number 13, another game that I did stream, another game that I thought was very good for what it is. However, what it is just not a thing that I'm like that invested in. But again, had fun with Sonic Shadow Generations. Now, specifically Shadow Generations, where Sonic Generations side of it is just a remaster. The Shadow Generations, though, is new content that I'd never played before. And too far, I never played Sonic Generations either. But Shadow Generations, again, I thought was a very fun Sonic game. I believe a lot of the levels were just redos of previous levels. Yeah, again, it did feel like kind of a greatest hits of Sonic games. Again, a lot of like fast-paced levels that, again, just felt very Sonic-y, to where ultimately, again, I don't really have that much of a connection to Shadow Generations in the grand scheme of things. But again, I thought it was a well-made game. Really better than Sonic Frontiers, the last Sonic game I played, which I just thought was incredibly mid. I feel like this, again, feels like a pretty big leap ahead of that, where for me, again, it's here number 13. Now, number 12, moving on to a game that I was pretty excited for coming into it, and I felt like I came out of it largely just kind of whelmed with it. And that game is Still Wakes the Deep, which is a game by the China Room, who developed Everyone's Gone to the Rapture, a game I really loved back in the day. And again, their new game here, Still Wakes the Deep, was surprisingly more gameplay focused than I was expecting. There definitely was a lot more like kind of like stealth sections, platforming sections that, again, kind of mixed results with those. Yeah, in general, again, a pretty solid like horror game here, and I did think there were some pretty good performances in this game. Now, something I do very much respect from this game is the fact that it is essentially this giant set piece, that it is essentially this self-contained focus game of you just navigating through this oil rig, trying to find a way to escape. And I feel like the fact that it is so focused around that ends up becoming one of the strong points of this game, and was otherwise just kind of a competently made experience here, one that doesn't really stick out to me for much beyond that, to where I didn't find the grander narrative beyond that to be anything too noteworthy, though. I think how focused this game is in nature did lead to some of the strong suits with this game. Again, putting it here at number 12. But then we move on to number 11, and this is actually the first game from the entire year of 2024 that I ended up playing playing it all the way back in July. It is Banishers Ghost of New Eden, a Don't Nod game, which was the major reason why I played it, because at the time I was planning on doing Don't Nod ranking until Lost Records was coming out relatively soon. I decided to wait for that, and now I'm waiting for my physical copy of Lost Records to arrive to make that video. But either way, again, I played Banishers at the time, anticipation of making that video. So I did have like kind of mixed opinions on this game coming into it, considering the fact that I didn't love Vampire. I know this is the team that developed Vampire, to where I didn't have the highest expectations. Yeah, ultimately, I thought this is actually, again, a pretty solid game. I thought gameplay-wise, I thought I had a really interesting combat system. It definitely felt like a massive step up from Vampire in that light, while also, I thought narratively, again, it was interesting. Now, again, it's another game that, again, its narrative didn't really stick to me by the end. I don't feel like it's a narrative that I'll be thinking about in the years to come. Yeah, ultimately, again, for this being a stab at having a more like cinematic action-adventure game from Don't Nod, I thought this is, again, a pretty competent experience. The one that ultimately, again, I just think there are games that just connected with me a bit more, but still, again, a solid, slightly above average game, which is why it's here number 11. Now, number 10, we're moving on to a game that I know got a lot of hype amongst the general gaming community, a game that was very much revered, yet for me, I just thought it was okay. And that game is Indiana Jones in the Great Circle. Obviously, again, a Machine Games made Indiana Jones game that, again, does what it needs to do. I mean, I think, again, in terms of people wanting to live out this fantasy of being Indiana Jones and make it feel like you're playing a scene out of the movie, does this game do that? Yes, it does. Now, does it do much beyond that for me? Not really. And I feel like that's the thing, is that for me, it's like, I think it lived up to its potential. I think this is essentially what I thought the game could be. But it's also just something that I'm personally not that invested in, where I'm not big into first-person games. I don't think the game's narrative as a whole is anything like with too much depth. Again, it's just a game that, again, isn't specifically made for me, but I had fun with what it was, and I do think what it is executed pretty well here. Just, again, a game that I don't think I was ever going to have in like the upper echelons of my list to begin with, but again, still a well-made game for what it is. It's here number 10. Now, number 9, and we're going from a game that I think lived up to its potential to a game that definitely did not, a game that I had very high expectations coming into it. However, again, I was just kind of left underwhelmed by it about then, and that game is Like a Dragon: Infinite Wealth. And again, this is one of the last games I played of the year, a game I felt like I needed to play, again, having played the other Yakuza games, and again, adoring Like a Dragon 7, my favorite game in the series. Or again, this being a direct sequel to that was a very interesting prospect, and I was very excited to see how Infinite Wealth went, and I came out of it just very underwhelmed, where for me, again, I do think gameplay-wise, this is an improvement upon the original in pretty much every single way. Again, it just adds more depth to the combat system. That, again, I thought was a lot of fun. Its original appearance last time, and like, I mean, unlike Like a Dragon 7, which again, I adore that game, but there were so many points within the main campaign that I got so frustrated with, which again, I never had with Infinite Wealth. And I think that's at least something to give this game credit for. That, again, I think it was like kind of like the perfect level of difficulty. Where, again, I have nothing but praise to be said from a gameplay perspective. My main criticism of this game are its narrative. I think its narrative is a fucking mess. And again, to a frustrating degree, where again, I came out of Like a Dragon 7 being very excited to see where to go with Kasuga beyond that. To where, to be fair, I didn't need another Kasuga game. I feel like his arc was kind of wrapped up perfectly in that game. But again, I was still excited to see what they were going to do with him here. And the answer was really not that much. And again, not that they really needed to. Again, I feel like he's fine as being a flat character from this point on. But I think a major issue with this game is I don't think it knows what it wants to be. Because, again, something I haven't talked about yet is the fact that obviously this game also reintroduces Kiryu to the main series. A spot where it just feels so unnecessary. Where it just feels like fan service, the reason why he's here. Or while, again, I do think Kiryu has an interesting arc across this game, he does end up really just muddying what the game is, where I do think it leads to a lot of this game just coming off very shallow, and it feels like, again, it just feels like Kiryu taking the spotlight from Kasuga, just because he's obviously just the more popular character. So I do think I come out of this game just looking at it as like a really unfocused mess, and really the main reason why it's this high on this list is because of the gameplay. I genuinely love the gameplay of this game. Also, again, I think narratively, while it was frustrating, it wasn't to the point of, again, Rebirth, and to forget, much better gameplay-wise than Rebirth anyway. But again, I didn't have like as much vitriol for Infinite Wealth. And again, I do think there were strong suits to this game. I actually think overall, though, it was just kind of a mess of a game that, again, was tough to really rank too highly. But then moving on to number 8. And now we're wrapping up kind of these like smaller scale games. They're starting off with, again, a very unique game. Like, that probably is one of the most meta games I've ever played. That game being Indica. Indica, a game where you play as a nun, and it being a story that tackles themes with religion, feeling like a game version of an art house film, is perfectly up my alley. However, I do think something interesting about this game is the fact that it includes a lot of mini games that are like callbacks to old school retro games that, again, was very strange. Adding this level of surrealism to this game. I feel like this is a very unique experience. I do think, again, just how weird of a game it is. The fact that you're playing as a nun and doing these like weird puzzles and then transition over to like 8-bit sections was, again, just such a unique experience. It made this game pop in the current gaming landscape to where, while not one of the best games of the year, it is one of the most unique games I have ever played, which ends up landing it this high on the list here at number 8. Now, number 7, moving on to a game from a company that I despise, yet they made a competent enough game here. And again, I streamed this game. I kind of made it a more palatable experience as well. And that game is Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown, where, again, Ubisoft sucks, but I do think they actually made a pretty decent Metroidvania game here. Now, obviously, again, it didn't do the greatest for them. They literally shut down the team that made it, but still, they made a pretty good game. I will give them credit for that. Now, while I did get stuck at points, it's a game that, again, I just had fun playing on stream. It was a nice progression of the Prince of Persia formula. While, again, it's a game that doesn't really have the greatest amount of depth, especially from a narrative perspective. It's a game that did have a fun enough combat system and some pretty solid platforming that really makes up for it being a well-made game, especially for Ubisoft, landing it here at number 7. Now, number 6, now we're moving on to a game that, another one of the more recent games I played, one of the last games I played for this list, and a game I really liked, and that game is Neva. For Neva is a game that, again, I was hearing very good things about, to where I wanted to give it a shot myself. However, again, I never played any games by this developer, so before playing this, I actually did play Grease as well, which I did enjoy as well, but again, getting to Neva, I thought was really an improvement upon Grease in a lot of ways. I thought it was, again, still taking like this like 2D puzzle platformer style of game, but also adding in combat this time around. Get more of a like in-your-face narrative about this woman, her bond with this wolf that you see grow over the course of the game. And again, I thought it was a improvement upon Grease from a gameplay perspective. I will say, though, I think what Grease does is very intentional in what it is, and I feel like Neva is a game that I do question a bit more its like overall focus. Yeah, it's a game that I thought by the end I did really love. I love a particular reveal that happens towards the end of the game that recontextualizes the entire story, which overall just kind of increases my opinion of the game. As I do think without that, I probably would have come out of Neva thinking of it as, again, being kind of a lesser narrative than Grease. But ultimately, again, I felt like it was a pretty interesting story, one where you really feel this connection to Neva, while also, again, having a bit more depth from a gameplay perspective, to where ultimately, again, I thought Neva was a pretty well-made game. Let's hear number 6. Now, number 5, and now we're getting close to my top tier of the list. It's being a game that is technically a remake, a game that I never played the original of, though, and I think they did make some changes here that would make it qualify for this list anyway. At number 5, I do have Silent Hill 2. And again, Silent Hill 2 is one that got a lot of hype, a lot of talk about how it was a great remake, and playing it, I thought it was a very well-made game. And again, I do question how much of that really is just coming from the original, but yeah, I think you could tell, obviously, a lot of inspirations that were put into the remake here from the Resident Evil remakes, though with, again, the narrative of Silent Hill 2, and I feel like the narrative of Silent Hill 2 is very good, one that tackles some really interesting themes, one that has some great characterization. Beyond that, again, it's a pretty solid third-person horror game. We're in a spot where, again, I did feel kind of reminiscent to that of like Resident Evil 2, Resident Evil 4 remakes, but obviously utilizing a lot more psychological horror over just being a straight-up zombie game. Obviously, it is its narrative that really ends up grounding this game to the point where I did overall really enjoy this game. I do get a lot of the hype around Silent Hill 2, particularly what it does from a narrative perspective. Though, again, it is a game that, again, at the end of the day is a horror game, and because it is a bit tough for me to personally enjoy it, which, again, I do play a lot of these like horror games, especially these remakes, but again, it's tough to really enjoy them from my perspective, considering how terrified I am when playing them most of the time, but obviously that is the appeal of the game. I think considering this game, again, has a grander narrative on top of that, again, makes this one of the best games of the year. It's here number 5. Now number 4, and at number 4, we're moving on to a game that I wish I had more time to play. However, what I played of it was very good, very addicting, and commonly talked about as one of the best games of the year, and that game is Balatro. And again, Balatro is a game that I've played probably about 15 hours of it on stream, and again, obviously, how much of that was I really focusing on, but what I've played Balatro, I think is very good. The fact that it takes like a very simple game of poker and makes it into a really addicting roguelike game is kind of insane. And again, the fact that you can obviously buy all these different cards, shake up your deck, you can get all these like bonuses, is for specific types of hands that you create, and it really just being a game of you trying to beat progressively higher scores. That it's not you facing off against an opponent, but it's essentially more so a glorified game of solitaire. Again, I think it's a really interesting concept for a game, and I think it's executed very well here, where again, it's so addicting. I just wish I personally had more time to play it, but from what I've played of Balatro, I do think it's an extremely well made game. But again, there's just games I have more of a personal connection to, which is why it's not higher on this list. But I do think there's a serious argument this is the most well designed game of the year. But again, for me, it's here number 4. Now number 3, and now we're moving on to a game that, again, got a lot of hype, a lot of Game of the Year awards, and I was very happy to see it win Game of the Year, and that game is Astrobot. And I loved Astrobot, obviously a 3D platformer made by Sony that really respects Sony's history, where obviously like the other Astrobot games, ends up having so many references to previous games, so many bots of characters from other franchises, and just, again, feels like a celebration of gaming. And I feel like that is something to be commended, along the fact that it's also just a great platformer in its own right. It is just a really fun 3D platformer that really just takes the concepts that were utilized in Astro's Playroom and really just expands upon it to actually make a genuinely great game, and one that is, again, just so much fun. And I feel like that is the main thing I take away from Astrobot, is that it's just a genuinely fun game, to where I think a lot of people kind of scoffed at the fact that it won Game of the Year. I feel like a lot of those people have not played it, where I think if you play Astrobot, you will recognize just how great of a game it is. And again, obviously, everyone has their own personal taste in gaming, and ultimately, again, obviously, I still have 2 games above this game on my overall list, but I am very happy that something like Astrobot ended up winning Game of the Year, especially over Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. So I just felt like Astrobot was such a great gameplay experience that really stuck with me in a spot where, again, typically I would hate a game that is just having fan service seemingly for the sake of having fan service. Yeah, again, I feel like this is a game that finds a reason to do it and ends up utilizing it very well, with the entire game just coming off as a celebration of PlayStation, which in general, again, just a very tight gameplay experience that was just so much fun to play. So again, for me, it's here number 3. Number 2, and now we're moving on to 2 games that I think are generally 2 of the best games I've ever played, and that makes this one of the most difficult years to be declaring a Game of the Year for, where these are 2 games that were, again, just both masterpieces in their own right, both actually coming from the same company, which is pretty insane. Both games easily in my top 10 of all time. Again, last time I made a top 10 list for me personally, they were both in my top 6, to where, again, 2 games that I think are really incredible, 2 games that really made the year for me and actually took up most of my playtime for the year. That being said, the actual decision between the 2 is pretty brutal, where I'm just going to say 2 games now. We got Metaphor ReFantazio, obviously the new game developed by the original creator of the Persona series, and Persona 3 Reload, the remake of Persona 3. And 2 incredible games, 2 very intentional games, and 2 games that are exactly what I am personally looking for from the video game medium, to where, again, this decision is brutal over which one is better than the other. Again, there's obviously a major distinction between the 2 in terms of how I would be assessing it on this list. To where, again, I'm ultimately not confident in what I should pick as my Game of the Year, so screw it. I'm not going to pick. I'm instead going to do a tie for first place here. A tie between Metaphor ReFantazio and Persona 3 Reload, 2 of the best games I've ever played. I know that there's going to be people that think this is a cop-out, but really, I don't care. It's my list. And again, this was a very difficult decision between the 2, specifically because genuinely, I think my actual Game of the Year would be Persona 3 Reload. To where, again, if you want to really force me to pick a game, I will pick Persona 3 Reload. However, I just feel very weird about picking a remake, especially one of this nature that, especially from a narrative perspective, is more so a one-for-one remake of the original game. Again, having that as my Game of the Year just kind of bothers me, especially when we have a game as great as Metaphor ReFantazio also coming out this year. To where, again, for me, this is just such a brutal decision, to where ultimately I decided to go with both. Now, to talk through each game, obviously, again, Metaphor ReFantazio, the new game from original director of Persona, and again, it's an incredible game, one that takes a lot of the concepts of Persona and really transforms it into a different series. Again, a game set in a more fantasy world, but really taking that to a very meta level, and I feel like the way it's able to utilize the concepts of fantasy within its narrative is really exceptional. I really feel like, again, just narratively, this is probably one of the best games I've ever played. I think its intentionality and what it does narratively, and how that even connects to its gameplay loop, is very impressive. But through that, again, it's a game that feels familiar but also different at the same time. It takes like the calendar system from Persona and kind of adjusts it in a way that really fits this game. And I think along with that, again, the combat system of this game, I think, was just so much fun. Also, again, having a job system, which, again, technically, like, actual Persona system is similar to that. But again, in the Persona series, obviously, it's, again, just one character that can change personas. In this game, it's essentially as if everybody has a different persona. And I feel like, again, the idea of like having all these different archetypes that each character can have and trying to create like the best combination for specific enemies was again just so much fun. And again, when you also have that mixed in with a follower system similar to the social links in Persona, you still have the royal virtues. Again, it essentially just feels like a glorified Persona game, but still again distinct in its own way. And when you again have these like really well realized themes about anxiety and utopia and really utilizing this to create a message that is generally meant to change how people view the world, I think it's something that again is just so resonant to me. So again, in any other year, this would be by far the easiest game of the year contender, but this is a year that also has Persona 3 Reload, a game that also is just insanely good. Now, I will say with Persona 3 Reload, the things that, again, that are a bit weird here is the fact that obviously, again, it is a remake, but also it's a remake that I think does some things better than the original, but also some things worse. And again, it's a spot where I never played original Persona 3 myself, but again, having seen a lot of talk about it, I do realize that the Reload version of it, again, it kind of strips away some of the artistic integrity of the original game. I do think also there were some minor narrative changes that people did not like as well, along with the fact that, again, combat was very much watered down from its original intention to be made into essentially a Persona 5-like game. And I think that is something that, again, I get those criticisms. That being said, I think I still personally really enjoyed the game. And I feel like, again, not having that context of the original game left me in a spot where I could still enjoy the remake here for what it was, where, again, it did feel very Persona 5-like, but not in a bad way, especially when its narrative is as great as it is. Dare I say, Persona 3's narrative is possibly one of the best in gaming history, where I think it's a game that, again, is able to utilize the gaming medium to really transcend the gaming medium and actually try to genuinely impact a person's life and change their view on life in a game that is essentially about life. And again, I think just how much this narrative impacted me by the end, and how much like every little thing in this game really connects to those themes with so much intentionality. Again, I think something that is kind of lost with future Persona games is the fact that it feels like things done in Persona are done because it's done in a Persona game, where I feel like they were intentionally made for Persona 3. The calendar system, the social links, and just kind of common aspects of Persona games, again, were intentionally made for Persona 3 because they really resonate with the themes of the story. And I feel like Persona 3 is just such an intentional game in a way that has me respect it to the umpteenth degree. But again, I think the weird thing about Persona 3, and again, actually truly declaring it as my game of the year, is I do recognize that this is, to some degree, the inferior product to the original. And I think there's also the fact that, again, it just is a remake. And I think, again, it does make it tough for me to genuinely say it is my top game of the year, even though I would say that it is the game that resonated with me the most. Even though, again, Metaphor is right there as well. Metaphor is also one of the best games ever made. Again, both of these games are in my top 6 games of all time. With, at this point, 3 of my top 6 all come from Atlas, which is kind of insane. But again, really, both of these games really connected with me. And both of these games are a lot of the reason why I did not play as many games as I did across the year. Or both of these games, again, took me almost 100 hours each, to where obviously that was also a major reason why there were a decent amount of games that I did not get around to. But again, I think it was well worth it considering they were 2 of my top games of the year. Now, I should mention the fact that I am going to do extended videos on both of these games at some point down the road. I've actually already recorded them. The question is when am I going to get around to editing them? But again, I have already recorded very long videos talking about my experience and my overall thoughts on Persona 3 and Metaphor for down the road. So again, you can stay tuned for those at some point. So ultimately, again, I just think both Persona 3 Reload and Metaphor ReFantazio are 2 of the best games ever made. So you can quibble with the fact that I'm not making a genuine choice here for my number 1 game of the year, but that's really to give credit to just how incredible both these experiences are, where I feel like both these games I could declare as my game of the year for 2024. But with that, again, that is my year in gaming video for 2024. Now, I do have some modifications to this I want to announce for the following year, where again, I mentioned this last year that I was debating if I was still going to do the video in the same way, and again, I ultimately essentially did, where I obviously just have less time to play games, and again, I think trying to play so many games within a deadline is not really the ideal situation for me nowadays. However, I still do want to continue on with videos like this, where I do think I am going to continue with this sort of video, but kind of doing it again a bit of a different way. First, the fact that, again, I mentioned this last year, and I will probably actually stick with this. This upcoming year, I am planning on doing a video that, as of right now, I'm dubbing it as my year in gaming. A video more so related to the games that I played across the year. Now, it won't be a ranking, it'll be more so like a kind of just rundown of every game I was able to play over the course of, again, 2025, to where, again, I think that is a video video I will do, and that will again allow me to talk about really just every game that I played over the course of the year and talk about my experiences with them. Well, also, I still think I am going to do a video like this, but again, just try to lessen the scale of it. I think it's a spot where I'm not going to force myself to play just games from the year 2025. I think I'm just going to attempt to be just more natural and play what I want to play and still do a video kind of at the midpoint of next year and just see how many games I can play up to that point without actively like going so far on my way to do so. Basically, I still do want to do a video where I rank the games of the year. I still want to do a video where I declare my game of the year. Well, also, I still want to give myself the opportunity to play games that are not just solely dedicated to the previous year, which is essentially how it has been over these last couple years. So again, I think I'm going to essentially do a mix of the two. I'm going to do a video running through all the games I played of the year, just games I naturally want to play, while also still doing a ranking, but just again, not being on as big of a scale, because again, I still have this other video that I also want to make as well. And again, I think that is kind of the intention moving forward. And in general, also, I'm not entirely sure what I'm going to necessarily do with video game videos on this channel from this point on, in the sense that, and obviously, when I started the channel, there were a lot more video game videos then. They've obviously just slowly disintegrated over time to the point where now I generally just don't have as much time to make video game videos. And obviously, again, they don't perform as well, is also a factor there. But still, it's still a spot where I also just don't have time to make them. They obviously take longer to make, especially these like bigger retrospectives. However, I do want to announce that again, I'm still going to do them periodically, especially for series that I've already started and games I'm genuinely passionate about. However, I do think the days of doing like a random like Tomb Raider 2013 retrospective or a random LA Noire video are probably past us at this point. But I think for retrospectives from now on, again, they're going to be games I just have a lot of passion for. Like, I'm still going to like continue on my Assassin's Creed retrospectives, even though I'm kind of nearing the end of that as well. Again, probably the Telltale games. And I am considering doing videos on, again, like Death Stranding 2, which recently came out, Expedition 33 when I eventually play it. Again, there are still games I would like, again, maybe make videos on. And again, I'm not opposed to doing more rankings. I feel like that's actually kind of the best compromise. Games that are, again, relatively quick to make, I'm still willing to do, to where, again, I think the number of video game videos might decrease from now on, but again, I still will be doing some periodically. But again, that is my year in gaming video for the year 2024. Thank you for watching.